We can begin.
Yeah. Okay. Good evening. My name is Carol Barry Austin, and along with my co-chair of the Schools Committee, Jocelyn Ryan, we welcome you all this evening on behalf of the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race, and more specifically, the Schools Committee. We would particularly like to thank Mr. Johnson for sharing this evening with us. As many of you may already know, the Coalition is a 501c3 organization whose mission is to build and sustain integrated communities and schools that are inclusive. We are supported financially by Maplewood and South Orange governing bodies, in addition to donations from neighbors like you all. Our programs are free and very often provide opportunities for the community to come together to form bonds across race and culture. The Coalition has, over the past 25 years, opened up dialogue about integration, equity, and inclusiveness in our two towns and our school district. Along the way, we have also influenced the discussion regarding the minority achievement gap. That is one of the reasons the Schools Committee sponsors preschool events. Studies have shown that the achievement gap begins as early as preschool. We are delighted to have with us this evening the District Supervisor of Preschool Education, Mr. Leroy Johnson. And now I would like to turn the program over to my co-chair, Jocelyn Ryan, who will introduce Mr. Johnson and give you an overview of the evening. So again, thank you all for coming, and we hope you find the evening informative.
Thanks, Carol, and welcome everybody. So this evening, as Carol said, we have Mr. Johnson, and we appreciate him working with us to create this program so that we can talk about the preschool program that exists now in the district, which wasn't around when our kids went to preschool, but it's fantastic now that it's available. For tonight, Mr. Johnson's going to give us a presentation that he's prepared for us. Then we will open it up to a Q&A, and following which there'll be an evaluation. And I'll give more directions around the Q&A when we get there. I would just ask that you please mute yourselves until you're called upon to ask your own question by the moderators, and then we'll have you switch on your camera and unmute. We may run out of time, and that you may not get a chance to have your question answered. So during the evaluation, please don't pop off early, because in the evaluation, which will pop up as you leave the Zoom, there will be an opportunity to ask any questions that you didn't get answered, and we will follow up with the district and get back to you. So, because we are limited on time, I'm going to hand straight over to Mr. Johnson.
And we do want to remind everybody that we are recording this evening.
Okay. So I first would like to thank the Coalition on Race for the invitation. I'm humbled by it, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the public regarding our preschool program. So just a little structure for our agenda today. We're going to talk about, briefly go over the overview of our program. We'll talk about our locations and the capacity for our students. We also will talk about our support staff structure, so how our staff are structured for support throughout our preschool program in the district. We have a preschool early childhood advisory council. I'll speak briefly about that. And of course, we'll talk about registration and placement and any before and after care options that are available to families. So the first thing is our curriculum. Our preschool is consistent throughout our entire district, offering the same access to education, whether placed in our district school or one of our provider sites. This means access to the same curriculum, individualized programming needs of our preschool, and individualized programming needs for our students, as well as our preschool support staff. So all schools have the same district oversight as it pertains to our program, which includes our child study team. We have 4 instructional coaches. We have 1 family involvement specialist, and then of course our administrative supervision. We offer a 6-hour full-day program that provides various learning experiences. Some of the activities built into the daily schedule consist of both small and large group learning activities. We have outdoor gross motor play, and then we also have opening and closing group, as well as snacks and nap time. Our curriculum is called Tools of the Mind, which is one of the 4 state-approved curriculums that follows the methodology that students learn from more capable peers and adults, as to why our classrooms are mixed age groups. Our teachers follow developmentally appropriate teaching practices for our preschool age students. That involves the implementation of hands-on play-based tactile experiences while differentiating their instruction to meet the various learning styles of our students. So with the curriculum, I do have here a outline of each of our schools and the capacity that we have. So the preschool options that I will speak to are based on the various programs. So while our preschool classrooms implement the same curriculum, which is Tools of the Mind, we have our general education programming, we have inclusion programming, and then we have self-contained programming. We currently have 6 preschools throughout our district, which are outlined here. They're comprised of 1 district school and 5 preschool partner sites. Those schools are Zadie's of the Oranges, which has a total capacity to seat 30 students. That's 2 classrooms. Iris Family Center for Early Childhood Education, there's 60 students we're able to seat there, and that's 4 classrooms. Our largest school is our Montrose Early Childhood Center. There's 105 students that we can seat in our general education classrooms, which are 7. And then we have 3 self-contained classrooms. And if you total those together, it's 33 students that we seat there. Apple Core Learning has 60. La Petite Academy also has 60 students. And then we have 15 students, which is 1 classroom at our newest provider site this year, and that's Curious Children Child Care Center. Our total program capacity currently is at 363. Our universal number is 1,000. And so what universal means is there are, within our South Orange and Maplewood borderlines, we project that about 1,000 students are out there in preschool who are eligible. And once we are able to seat all students within our South Orange and Maplewood school district, then we will be at universe. So right now we're at 363, and we have grown each year since the inception of our preschool aid. So we look forward to getting to those numbers over the next few years. So I do want to speak a little bit about our program structure. We have preschool instructional coaches. Those coaches go in and provide support directly to teachers. So teachers may have questions about how they're implementing the curriculum, and they will be able to be supported through those coaches. So there's a teacher-coach relationship that spreads out through the entire year. They go in and do classroom visits. They provide feedback to teachers. They also offer professional development in the areas of curriculum and instruction. And so that's our first sort of line of support to our teachers. We have a preschool intervention and referral specialist. So there's 2 of those. Those individuals you can look at as support staff that provide support to teachers who have students who exhibit challenging behaviors, right? And so we do know that we do have typical 3- and 4-year-old behaviors, but sometimes we don't know if it's based on their abilities or if it's something that's just developmental. So we do have a preschool instructional specialist, intervention specialist that goes in to provide that level of support. They look at the environment, they look at any sort of plan that needs to be put in place for students who need support in those areas, and then they offer professional development as well to teachers. These individuals focus more on the social emotional component of our students in our preschool program. We have a community parent involvement specialist who supports our program by hosting different events that we have throughout the district. Some of those events happen during the day, some are evening events. For example, we do have one tomorrow evening, which will be housed at Montrose, which talks about lice and providing support to families who need more information about lice. So those are just some examples. And then we also have an early childhood advisory council, which I will get to and speak briefly upon as well. And that is to we encourage families to join that council so that they can help contribute to our, making sure that our program is of high quality. And so the purpose of the Early Childhood Advisory Council is to make connections among school and community members, to build relationships, and to work together in meeting the needs of our preschool program. So all families are invited to participate in our Early Child Advisory Council. This information is released early in the year. They will show their level of interest, and then we will, sort of form the committee from there. So one of the big things is registration, and I want to touch on registration. So Preschool registration is typically begins during the month of March. And the time where families are, this is the time where families are encouraged and invited to begin the registration process. So they begin by filling out the online pre-registration form during the preschool registration timeframe. And so while there's a registration deadline in filling out the online registration form, the deadline is only in place to ensure an equitable process in our program participation. So families who register prior to the deadline will participate in our district's preschool lottery system, which determines consideration for participation. And students whose families who have successfully completed the enrollment process will be notified of their opportunity to participate, and the names will be called from the lottery list until the program is at its capacity. And then all families who have registered after the deadline will be placed on a separate waiting list and will be notified of their next steps and opportunities once all of the students from the lottery list have been placed. So there's two different lists. There's a lottery list that's ran. If families miss the deadline for the lottery list, they're sort of housed in our Power School registration system. And then once we've depleted the lottery list, we then go to those families who may have registered after the deadline, and then we'll notify those families accordingly. And that's only after we've seated families from the lottery list and we're at capacity. And then any openings that come up will go from there. So schools are assigned based on program and availability, which means that students with special needs whose IEPs indicate general education programming with accommodations and modifications, they'll be placed in one of our inclusive classrooms. And these classrooms have a total capacity of 15 students per class, and they may not exceed 5 students with IEPs. Students who require self-contained programming will be placed in one of our 3 self-contained classrooms. And these classrooms have smaller class size capacities where the students all have IEPs. And then finally, students receiving general education programming are placed in one of our general education classrooms. And it's important to note that preschool placement is not based on parent choice or proximity between home and school. Rather, it's closely aligned to our district's intentional integration initiative, which means that our teams work diligently to help ensure our classrooms are well balanced with demographics and represent our entire district. And the demographics I'm speaking to would be our the age, race, gender, socioeconomic status, et cetera. This is a closer look at our preschool registration timeframes. So I just need to move. I see everyone's face on the screen, so I'm just going to move this over really quickly. The age requirements are to be 3 or 4 by October 1st of 2023. That's for this year. And then our registration timeframe is February 21st to through March 10th. And then our lottery, just to be a little bit more specific, we anticipate that happening in May. That's when we'll run the lottery. And then placement notification will begin late July to early August. And so it's just important to note that there's different components that play into that. It happens sort of after the governor's address, but also once funding has been solidified. Let's see here. This was my thank you, but I did want to talk about before and after care really briefly, because I do know that that's a topic of importance. And so before and or after care options are currently available at all of our schools and are private arrangements between family and provider. Families who choose to attend Montrose make arrangements through the YMCA. And then all other families who attend our provider sites, they will make arrangements through each of their respective schools. So our before and after care options, if they're available at our schools, those are, you would have to contact the school to get information on that, because it's not part of our program. It's just sort of a wraparound program that's offered. And the families just have to make arrangements with each school based on that. That will be any fees that come with that or not. That information I don't have. It'll have to come from the schools themselves. I believe I touched on everything. Is there anything that the team wishes for me to speak more about or address?
No, I think those are all the main points. I think we can move into the Q&A.
Okay.
So you could stop sharing your screen, and then we can see people's faces on the gallery. So for the Q&A, what I would ask is that everybody use the little raise your hand feature, and I'll call on you as I see you. If you notice that your hand has been up for ages and I haven't called you, just send me a chat directly to me, and I'll call you. If we don't get to everybody, as I mentioned before, we will have a chance in the evaluation, which will pop up on your screen as you exit the Zoom, for any questions that you didn't get answered that you really want the answers to, and we will follow up with Mr. Johnson directly. So if, let's see, so does anybody have their hands up? I can't see any participants. Audrey, have you set it up in some magic way that I can only see, or is that my own screen? Oh, that's my screen. Okay, now I can see everybody. That's me. So does anybody have any questions for Mr. Johnson?
I have a question.
Carol.
With the enrollment, you mentioned that at full capacity, it would be 1,000. What is the time frame in terms of, you think, getting to that 1,000, and what is it dependent on? Is it depending on space in buildings or finances to come in?
Sure, great question. So again, the 1,000 mark is our universe, and that's contingent upon the level of interest from our provider site. So we no longer have space in district to house our preschool program. So what we do is we establish partnerships with local childcare providers, and we just simply use their space, right? So like there's a private section of that, there may be a private section of the school where they have their own private program. And then if there's additional space in that school and they would like to open it up to our public school, that's when we then begin a partnership, which is a very long process to start. And then they have to have their paperwork in order. They have to meet the state requirements. And then we begin to place students there. So it's not the same program with the private in the public, but it's the same program for public across the board. So if we open up a new partnership, which we do anticipate for next year, we're just using the space to house our same program. And that time frame, we would like to, of course, meet our universe tomorrow if we could, but it really depends on, the partnerships and the interest of people who would like to open up their school to us.
Thank you. Melanie.
Hi. Well, first, thank you for hosting this session, and Leroy, thanks for coming and sharing all this information. You mentioned that you all strive to have a kind of inclusive setting with like the demographics broken down. So curious to learn a little bit more about that, like how you all actually kind of determine the breakdown across classes, if it's aligned to just general like SOMA demographics, or if there's like another kind of way you all approach that, but it'd be helpful to understand that more.
Sure. So the information is released to our department as far as like who registered within a time frame. And of course, it has to go based on the lottery. So I can't look at the lottery list and say, we're going to select number 1 and then number 8. We really have to make sure that we look at if there's 50 openings, we look at the first 50 students, and then we have to disseminate those students into each school based on those demographics. So because our program is mixed age groups, of course, we don't want to have all 3s in one school or one class and all 4s in the other. The same thing applies to gender, right? So we don't want to have all males in one classroom and all females. So we look at those different moving components, and then we make sure that the classrooms are well balanced based on the lottery list. So their students are placed in each school based on those demographics. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I suppose it does. Yeah, I think I was looking for more specifics, but I get it's based on the lottery. So
yeah, so it is.
Yeah,
it's that, if there's 10 openings that come out in the middle of the year, I have to take those 10 students who are next. And, it could be all females, right? It could be all males. So it really, we do our best to try to balance that way and make sure it's an equitable process, but still represents our district.
Totally. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Elizabeth.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for doing this session. It looks like Jennifer actually put my exact question in the chat, so we're asking the same question. But yeah, I was just curious in terms of the timeline. Does it mean that during the month of May, families who are in the lottery would find out that they're in the lottery list? Or do we hear anything during the month of May? Or could you just explain that a little bit more clearly? I think Jennifer worded it much better in the chat.
Okay, so sure. So let me just go make sure I don't mention placement estimated. Okay, right. So May would be the time where we would run the lottery itself. Families will know if they're on the lottery system if they've completed the registration process prior to the deadline. So you won't know, we don't give numbers where families are placed on the lottery. You'll just know based on when you registered. And then once the lottery is ran, we do send out notification to families of placement closer to the summer months, because we still have to make sure partnerships are solidified. We have to make sure that the funding is in place and the schools are ready to open. So that's why the time frame is pushed later into the summer and not like right after the lottery happens, because the governor gives his address, but we still have to wait for NJDOE, the New Jersey Department of Education, to tell us exactly how much money we have to be able to disseminate to each school, to allocate to each school rather. So the time for, I don't have exact dates. I really tried to give months, but it really does depend on when we're communicated with, as well as when schools are open. But all families will get notification of their placement once that's been established.
So then that May date is an internal date.
It's an internal,
families
right.
aren't going to hear about May. So the relevant date for families is July, August. That's when you're going to find out if you got a place. Right.
And then what we like to do is like post on the website that the lottery was ran, just so families know that we're moving through the process. And then once we're able to establish where students will go, we immediately send that information out to families. And that's why I gave that time frame and not really specific, because I don't have a specific date. I'm just going on past practice of when the information sort of came into us.
Carol?
Just a follow-up to that question. So families know that they're in the lottery in May. Does that indicate that they'll have a place someplace, but they just don't know where? Or do they have to wait until August to find out whether they actually have a placement? Because that would seem to place families in a bind in terms of trying to find some place then in September.
Right. So we notify all families that placement decisions have gone out regardless. They won't know if they're placed until they're notified that they're placed. So once that sort of July, August happens, we'll notify families, but then there's a lot that happens between there. Like we have families who withdraw, or families who would choose to be in a sort of private provider center, or families that move away, or there's so many things that happen. So the families who are notified between July and August, that they have their placement. The additional families won't know until, it's very fluid. They may not know until September. We continue to work through placement even now through March, right? So when families leave our program, we like to invite new families in and not hold off to say, okay, well, it's May. I understand that there's a few months left of school, but we don't want to lock any students out of an opportunity to participate in our program, and maybe even potentially roll over if they're preschool 3 to preschool 4. They may be interested for next year and they won't have to worry about the lottery. They just transition into their preschool 4. But I do acknowledge and understand the constraints. We've been trying to work through that. It's just, because we have a lottery system and we're not at our universe, these systems have to be in place.
We have a couple of questions in the chat that I'll read to you.
Sure.
One is, can you explain why the model is 3 and 4-year-olds? The question is, why not have the program offered to all 4-year-olds and then have the lottery go to 3-year-olds? Because
Sure.
other districts have done it that way. If you could talk about that, please.
Absolutely. So our curriculum, again, is based on, students learn from more capable peers and adults. And so we don't want to lock out any 3-year-old or give priority to 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds, because we want to make sure that we stand to what the curriculum sort of calls for. So we don't give priority to 3 over 4. Any family that's interested to participate is encouraged to apply, and we go from there.
And then the next question is there a policy for twin placement? So if there are siblings Is there a priority for if one twin is selected, will both be selected and will both go to the same school?
Yeah, so if there's a sibling, if there's one student on the lottery, let's say they're number 50 and the other student might be 300, if we call the student at 50 and they're a sibling, we look to see who else, who may be their sibling, and we do seek to place them in the same school. The only thing that would happen there is if that school is at capacity, then we're not able to place the sibling in that school. I will say that that hasn't happened to date. But it is a potential that there's no space for both students to go at the same school.
Okay, do we have any other questions? I see there's some people going in the chat. Can you raise your hand and ask your questions? Laura.
Yes, you had mentioned the IEP program. I was just hoping you could go over that again, just explaining how the IEP students and the general lottery students are all integrated or not.
Sure. So our students who have IEPs are guaranteed placement into our program, and so they don't have to worry about the lottery. But what happens is we have students who are entering, who may have applied when the registration period opened, and they may be going through the evaluation process to and potentially have an IEP. So if a student has an IEP and I didn't call their name yet, but they're on the lottery list, they'll come into our program through special education. And then the programs that we have our inclusion program, which is our general ed program. There's students who have IEPs, but they're in the general education setting. And then we have 3 self-contained classrooms. One is PSD, that's sort of like our mixed abilities classroom. And then we have 2 ABA classrooms, which focus on the ABA methodology for students who may need a more intensive program with trials, discrete trials, so on and so forth. And some generally those students are students who are diagnosed with autism. But it doesn't mean that we don't have students who need that program who don't have that diagnosis. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Joy, do you want to ask your question? Okay, she's not unmuting. Joy asked, when she filled out her application, she didn't enter her income. Will that count against her in the lottery?
No, I don't believe entering your financial information will count against you at all. It's more so about the registration. If there's information that was left out at that registration process, what I do know about registration is they will send the information back to families or notify that they're missing something. So if you weren't notified that was a concern, I don't think that would be a concern. I would just double check with the Office of Registration just to get a more concrete answer, because I don't oversee the registration department, but I do work with them collaboratively to help establish the process.
Okay.
But
Brittany?
in short, no, I do not believe that would count against you. Sorry.
Brittany. Brittany, I see your hand is up. Can you unmute? Oh, Brittany's microphone isn't working. Okay, Brittany, you can type your question. Let's see. Jennifer, did you want to ask your question in person? Jennifer was asking, you mentioned that people in the program, in the 3s program, can roll over to the 4s. So are there always enough spots for those children? So if you're in already as a 3, are you guaranteed a spot as a 4-year-old?
Yes, so if you start as a preschool 3, you will be rolled over to preschool 4. You will not need to re-register, and you will remain at the same school that you were in that year, that prior year, unless your program has changed for any reason. For example, if you now have special education programming and you require a different classroom or a different location, it's based on that.
Okay, oh, here's Brittany's question. If her 4-year-old son gets in next year, will there be sibling preference for her 3-year-old twins the year after?
So if that student is going to kindergarten, there's no sibling preference that way. It has to be at the same school at the same time.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Brittany? Okay. And then I had one.
Sure.
So when in July, August, when people are notified of their placements, is there then a deadline for them to respond with acceptance of those placements so that if people don't take them up, that you can re-offer them to the next people on the waiting list?
So we do ask, just as a courtesy, if families can let us know, that way we can send notification to additional families who may be on the waiting list. If families don't respond or they don't show up, they're like sort of like no call, no show. After 10 days, the district just has a policy where students are sort of withdrawn from the system. So there's like a 10-day period where once a student is eligible to start and they don't show up for those 10 days, they're not accounted for. We sort of move forward with next steps in that area. So yes, we do ask for families to do that, but if they don't or they're unable to, we do the outreach and make sure that everyone's okay, or if extra time is needed for whatever reason, and sort of work with families through that for each unique circumstance that may be there. But we do ask that families give us notification if that's feasible for them.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Joy, I saw your hand there, but it was fleeting. Do you have another question?
Yeah. Sorry, my name's Shri. I didn't realize you were talking to me. Sorry, it's like I'm trying to do bedtime. I'm trying to do bedtime here. That's why my camera's off. So the curriculum. I was wondering more about the curriculum, but I don't want to take time away from people asking about the registration process. But the Tools of the Mind curriculum. Just wondering, is that outside of the special needs programs that you mentioned? I guess that's the curriculum for everyone else. Is that right?
No, so our curriculum is consistent, even in our self-contained classrooms. It's the same curriculum. There just may be modifications as appropriate based on what students need. So it's the same curriculum, no matter if you're in general ed or special ed. The modification and accommodation sort of happens based on each individualized student.
Got it. And the brochure has all the relevant information about the curriculum itself.
Yeah, so there's we have unique names for preschool. So we have something called freeze dance. We have graphics practice. So these are like different names, but it's like literacy and music and movement. So the family brochure that we have on our preschool website does spell it out in a language I think that's more that families can understand a little bit better, that kind of gets rid of that academic language. But it is outlined there with each sort of component that we have, and with a little synopsis of what that entails, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'll just read that instead of taking up time here. Thank you.
Sure. And if you have any additional questions, you can certainly reach out to us and we'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
What are the qualifications of the teachers? Are they all certified teachers, including the teachers that are at the satellite schools? And who selects the teachers that are at the satellite schools?
Yeah, so all teachers have to have their preschool through grade 3 certification in order to be a teacher, whether it's in our district school or one of our collaborating sites. They have to be certified teachers. They can't or they have to have their certificate of eligibility or certificate of eligibility with advanced standing, which means that someone may have gone alternate route. But there's a certain level of education, higher education, that they need to sort of complete for those requirements, and they have time to do that. Mm-hmm. But as long as they have their certificate of eligibility, they can be employed by a district. As it pertains to the hiring of our provider sites, that's done with our directors of each school. Sometimes it's in conjunction with myself, but I do review the information that comes in to make sure that all of our teachers are certified appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, does anybody else have a question? No, it doesn't look like it. I had one last one, which was, you were talking about how you decide placement based on the lottery numbers and assigning the seats to the next 10 on the lottery as those next 10 seats become available. How does the intentional integration algorithm play into that?
So it doesn't. The intentional integration initiative, that algorithm, I believe, is for kindergarten through 12th grade. We just closely align with that. So I wish I had an algorithm. Maybe we'll work on that. But there's a lot of care that goes into it, a lot of review of you know, the student demographics to make sure that it's well balanced.
Thank you. Laura.
Just one last question. What is the teacher-student ratio? And then you had mentioned that resource about how to find more information about the programming. What is that site that we can
Sure,
go to?
absolutely. So one is the site and the other was, what was the first part of your question?
Oh, teacher to student ratio.
Okay. So there's, in our general ed classrooms, there's no more than 15 students, 1 teacher, and 1 paraprofessional. And that's in all of our classrooms. Any additional paraprofessional will be based on student need, and it's driven through their IEP or 504. So if there's a 1-to-1 paraprofessional or a shared paraprofessional, that would be provided through special education. But each class has 1 teacher and 1 paraprofessional with no more than 15 students.
Thank you.
In our general ed classroom. And then our self-contained classrooms, that configuration can look a little different. So we definitely have 1 teacher, 1 paraprofessional. Once the student number once it gets to a certain number, then another paraprofessional is added. It really just depends on what the ratio will be in our self-contained classrooms. So for example,
and I was just curious, if the student doesn't have an IEP, is that then in the general classroom and then the self-contained, or is there a mixture of IEP students and general students in the general classroom?
So if a student is an inclusion student, that means that they have an IEP, but they're put in that 15 student capacity class. So that's our inclusion. And all of our classrooms have the capacity to be inclusion classrooms, all of our general ed classrooms. And there's no more than 5 students with IEPs in those classrooms. We haven't had 5 this year. Because we've been able to expand, we were able to limit it to about 4. Maybe next year it could be 3. It really depends on, how many students require such services. But that's the ratio and the capacity in each, and the paraprofessional. Yep, sure.
And we have a couple more questions in the chat. So we have 363 spots or seats this year. We don't know at this point, is that correct? How many we would have for next school year?
We do not know. So there's a level of interest from providers who will be partnering with us potentially next year. But again, until those partnerships are solidified contractually, making sure that the facility is where it needs to be, we can't solidify or speak to those partnerships until they're actual partners with us. But I can share that we do anticipate increasing our program capacity. So that list that I showed you at the beginning of each school, that will, I strongly believe it will look different for next year.
So we had this year, how many more spots did we have this year? Was that 15 from the Curious Child? I can't remember what that one is called. Is it Curious Child?
So okay. 15 from Curious Children, but also La Petite Academy provided an additional classroom as well. Okay. And that's happened over the years. Apple Core, they had 3, they went up to 4, but that was the prior year, right? So in partnerships, it speaks to how successful we are as a district and the partnerships that we have, because these providers who we're partnering with are interested in allowing us to use more of their space. And so I'm happy to speak to the fact that not only are we extending with additional schools, we're extending within the schools that we've already partnered with.
Okay. Let's see if I've missed one question. So the lottery ended recently, a couple of weeks ago. Do you know yet, or are you willing to share how many people applied?
So I don't have that information yet. Once the registration team provides me with that, I'll have that, and then I'll be able to run the numbers and start the lottery. And again, that's, we all work collaboratively. So there's bits and pieces. I know what I project, right? But I don't know how many are coming in yet. I also don't know yet how many students will be remaining with us next year. That happens over the summer as well. Like I said, families that move away, also declassification and classification of students in special education. So it's such a fluid process, but I don't have the exact number to date.
I think the reason behind that question is if you applied and you know that 1,000 people applied and there are 363 seats, then kind of where do you stand? And then if you're not in the lottery, if you're on the second wait list, then, you know, do you have a chance, or should you just go out now and start looking for private options? Let me see if anybody, did I ask everybody's questions? I think so. If I didn't, will you send me a message? And then does anybody else have a new question?
Oh, I do. I just wanted to follow up with someone. I didn't get to answer the second part. I just remembered the information that I'm speaking to is housed on our district website under our preschool tab. And in there, it gives a lot more information about our curriculum. And a lot of the questions that are posed today, the frequently asked questions guide does offer some answers to those questions. And
that link is in the chat. That link is in the chat. So if people want to grab
Awesome.
that and bookmark it, a lot of the questions are in the FAQ, and there is a link to the Tools of the Mind curriculum.
Yep, and the parent brochure is
Yeah.
in there as well. I'm like learning from Dr. Taylor. I'm like taking my little notes as people are speaking. I just don't want to miss anyone. And I certainly appreciate his style with that. So I've learned from that.
Does anybody have any more questions? No, I think we are done. So as a quick reminder, the evaluation will pop up at the end. We would appreciate you filling it out. And also there will be another opportunity to ask any questions that you didn't get answered or that you didn't want to ask publicly. And there is always a chance to, you can always email Mr. Johnson if you have a question about your own particular situation, and his email is on the district website. So I am going to thank him again for coming
Sure.
on. And
don't be afraid to reach out to me. I'm truly accessible, and if it's not my department that handles it, I will certainly route you in the right direction. So just wanted to share that with you, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you. And I'm going to hand it over to Nancy to close us out. Nancy Gagne is our executive director.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I'm going to offer my thanks in a moment, but I do want to make a comment that the schools committee in the past has hosted a preschool open house to share all preschool opportunities with community members. And the public preschool is still limited in space and limited by lottery, and many people will be looking for other options. There are so many wonderful private options in both towns and in surrounding towns. And if you are looking for information on that, we can put together an updated list for you. We do want to share their information as well, because we know, and the schools committee is very committed to sharing this information because they know how important preschool is for children prior to entering their primary and secondary education. And with that, I want to thank the schools committee for hosting this, Mr. Johnson for sharing all of this information and answering all these questions. And I want to briefly share with you some upcoming events. The schools committee, this is especially good for folks who are here tonight, parents of preschoolers and early elementary school. We will be hosting a Talking to Children About Race for parents parenting kids in that age range. More information will go out within the next week or so. So please look for that in our e-newsletter and on our website. We have conversations on race. That is for adults on May 16th at the Woodland. The topic is rethinking the racial wealth gap. Our integrated art circles are ongoing. Please check the website. Deconstructing Racism, ongoing. Lots of great resources available there. And I think with that, I am done. Thank you again, Mr. Johnson and the schools committee.